Auspicious greetings to everyone. Welcome back to our History of Indian Buddhism. This class will be our last class, which is class 10, and we will continue to discuss on the teachings of the Yogacara school. And end of the teachings, we will do a final wrap-up of the 10 classes. So because I already mentioned that Yogacara school teachings is not a easy teachings to understand. And that's why in these classes, you might feel that it's quite confusing, which is normal. So hopefully that you have a chance in future to have the learning of the Yogacara teachings. So let's start the class now. Brief introductions on the Yogacara school class 10. Last week or last class, I did talk about the teachings in Yogacara schools, which a lot. And we only have about 50 to 1 hour, 60 minutes to talk about the teachings in Yogacara school. So I will only touch on the topic that related to consciousness, which is already a lot of information that I would like to share with all of you. So for the other topics, hopefully in future, you have a chance to attend the class on the Yogacara. So we start with the teachings on the consciousness. Consciousness is awareness of a self. The fundamental doctrines of the Yogacara school is that all phenomenal existence is fabricated by consciousness. So things that in our mind. Consciousness is the basis of all activities from birth to attaining enlightenment. All is based upon the coming into beings and the ceasing to be of consciousness. Distinction in the mind. So this consciousness is not just the activities that we have in this life. It includes the memory from past life, which means that when a baby was born to this world, this baby already have consciousness. Even in their mother's womb, they already have the consciousness. So it's the consciousness that get into the mother's womb due to the interactions of the father and mother. Consciousness is the distinctions-making activities of the mind, both in making and having distinctions, including the states we consider the conscious as well as the unconscious. So this consciousness is not just that when you are awake, you will have the consciousness. Even when we are sleeping, the consciousness is still working in the mind. So consciousness is not function when we are functioning in the daily activities. It includes the body that's sleeping. And even when we pass away, the consciousness still continue to function. Consciousness in making distinctions between self and others becomes the object which treats everything else as object. So when we see anything is the consciousness that distinguish what is this thing, the name of this thing, the size of these things, the nature of this thing. Consciousness itself is real. When we say real, means that it's changed all the time. It exists as a series or streams of successive momentary awareness of events, each immediately replaced by consciousness in the next moment. So the term real, reality, this term in Buddhism basically means changing. Everything changes from moments to moment, and that's why it's real, which means that there's no fixed entity. Consciousness has no substantiality and is depend on the consciousness of the preceding instant. Keep changing and changing. Depends on the interactions with the external factors and internal self. Since everything until the attainment of wisdom in enlightenment is consciousness, all objects in the external world are just representations in our consciousness. Since everything is just an aspect of consciousness, all phenomenal existence is without fundamental nature. Therefore, the I is illusory and there is no self to be found. Everything is just a phenomenon of consciousness. Eventually, consciousness that is attached to these representations and makes distinctions has to be clarified into wisdom, which is free of all attachment. So in here, I need to do some elaboration. Everything before we enlighten, the things in here, the memory in here is consciousness. And everything that we see is a representative of something that comes out from our consciousness. For example, this. How do I know that this thing in English is called mouse? How do I know it? This thing represents a term called mouse. But where do I get this term or this knowledge of this thing called mouse? In English. And if in Mandarin it's called 华鼠. But who determined that this thing is called 华鼠? This term 华鼠 comes out from where in my mind? And can I change this thing to another name? Of course. Of course. Why? Because this thing just represents this thing. And people give this thing a representative term called mouse. And this term mouse get into our consciousness and it become a memory in our mind, including this I, myself. Remember, I did mention about when I was a kid or a baby, my term is called baby. When I grown up, my term is called the kid. And then grown up, become youth. And then grown up to become young adult. And so on and so forth. So this self change all the time in the entity as well. So that's why there's no fixed self to be found. And all phenomenal things, people, sound, in a way is a representative type of information that in our mind, either be educated in this life or a memory from the past life. And if we're able to understand the nature of this phenomenal world, that will be a wisdom that will lead us to liberate out from suffering. And eventually will be free from all attachment. So this is something that brief elaborations to all of you. Hopefully you can understand the meaning in this point. There is nothing separate or independent from consciousness. The world is our perceptual construct. An analysis of the enlightened mind will show different level of perceptions, which are based in a storehouse consciousness, which we call it the eight consciousness or alaya consciousness, containing the karmic seeds of former action. So this storage consciousness is not just the knowledge or information that we learn or receive in this life. Actually, this storage includes the memory from our past lives, which we in Buddhism we call it the karmic seeds. It's just like a seed, plant in, keep adding, adding, adding. So this is about the consciousness. And next, we go to the teachings of the perceptual consciousness. The perceptual consciousness. And you look into the picture here. Eye, nose, ear, tongue, and here will be the body. So the fifth through first consciousness are the perceptual consciousness, from the number 1 consciousness to number 5 consciousness. They comprise the visual, hearing, smelling, tasting, and physical sense, which means that eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. These senses arise from the perceived divisions of the 8 consciousness. Each organ of perceptions have 2 parts. Its physical substance called the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body. The physical eye, the physical nose, physical ear, and physical tongue, and the body organ, and the nerves connecting it to the perceived division. And the second is the mental component. The mental component. They can appear in any order or all at once, depending on the situation. For instance, an illness or shock can stop their operation, which means that the eyes and the nose and the ear can function actually at the same time. When somebody scream, we can see that this person is screaming. We can hear the voice. Our body even can feel the fear from this person's body. So this is something that our body sense organs interact with the external thing and then get into our mental consciousness. However, if one of the sense organs is not working, so the operation might be stopped. For example, if one person, the ear, get deaf due to accident, this person will not be able to use the ear organ to hear things because it's not operating anymore. The fifth perceptual consciousness interact with the 31 dharmas, interactive with the mind, and the work in conjunction with the sixth consciousness, which processes their input to construct a mental picture of reality. Needs to be elaborate. These 5 perceptual consciousness, called the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness, interact with the external factors. In Buddhism, they classified into 31 dharmas. And this dharma does not mean the teachings from the Buddha. This dharma means all the things that we see, we feel, we hear, we can smell it in this world. So when the 5 perception consciousness, interact with these 31 external factors, and the interactive will get into the mind and then work in conjunction with the 6 consciousness, which processed their input to construct a mental picture of reality. So for example, if there's a car that drove in front of your car, is a red color. Okay, how do you know that that color is called red? Why can't you call it blue? Why can't you call it blue? Yeah. So because this eyes consciousness interact with this particular thing with this color, and then in the sixth consciousness will come up with this mental picture of this thing. And then we know that, oh, from here, we know that it's a red color. And where does this idea of red comes from? The memory. The memory. After perceptions from the first five consciousness are integrated in the sixth consciousness, they are introduced into the seventh consciousness, which put these cognitions into the eight as truly later were a real self. This continual process plant more karmic seeds in the eight consciousness. Again, this looks complicated, so we make it simple. As I mentioned earlier, is that it's a red color type of things, and this term called car, red car. When the eyes see the thing, that thing with that particular color, this interaction will get into the sixth consciousness. And when get into the sixth consciousness, they will pass through the seventh consciousness and then go into the eighth consciousness to retrieve out the information of these things that we know from our past life or from this life. And then it will come out red. At this point of time, it's just a recognition that this thing is called red. It has not differentiate out whether I like it or I don't like it. However, when the information comes out that it's red, it will go back to seven consciousness. And seven consciousness will say that, oh, I don't like red. I don't like red. It looks like blood color. I don't like it. And when this I don't like, this karmic seeds arises, a person can choose whether to continue to don't like, or a person can choose to take it easy, or a person can choose to like this red color. So the seven consciousness will be the one to either get attached or let go. If it's get attached to I don't like, this I don't like seeds, karmic seeds, will add more of these seeds into the eight consciousness. But if this person chooses to, well, that's fine, I don't mind, and it will basically have these seeds that I'm fine with that plant into the eight consciousness. And if this person chooses to say that, well, I don't like in the past, but I will start to like red color from now. I don't want to attach to I don't like. So these decisions that I start to like this red color will get to the eight consciousness and store in the eight consciousness. Okay? Perceptual consciousness. None of the five perceptual consciousnesses contain the potential for making moral distinctions. They don't make any distinction. So they are of indeterminate nature. All five functions on the first of the nine grounds, while eye, ears, nose, and body, etc., also occupy the second ground. None of them arise after the second ground, the first dhyana. The five perceptual consciousness are the fifth consciousness, that is consciousness of the body, or the tactile feeling. It perceived through contact, touch, which is the body consciousness. The fourth consciousness, which is the tongue consciousness or tasting, also perceived through contact. The tongue contact with food, water, anything. After the second ground, this perception ceased to function. Third consciousness, noise consciousness, or nose consciousness, or smelling perceived through contact. Again, interacting with the external factors. After the second ground, these perceptions also cease. The second consciousness, ear consciousness, or hearing perceived at a distance. And the first consciousness, the eye consciousness, or seeing perceived at a distance. So ear can perceive, do not need to physical have contact, same as the eye. But the nose, the tongue, the body needs to have the direct contact in order to come up the feeling. But when this five consciousness have this interaction or perceive the external factors, they just perceive. They don't interact. They are not the one that make the decision whether I want it, I don't want it, or whether it's red or blue or what. They just perceive. It's just like a mirror. The mirror won't say that, oh, I see this person is yellow color. The mirror won't say so. The mirror will only reflect what show in front of them. So in here, perception consciousnesses, a person with these five senses. And these five senses have five physical and five mental. The five physicals are the eye, ear, nose, mouth, and body. And the five mental consciousness, the five perceptual mental consciousness are the what? Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, and body consciousness. And when they interact with this thing, I see, I feel, I hear, I smell, I taste. When a body interact with all these external factors, it will get into the five mental perceptual consciousness. Okay, so these are the five perceptual consciousness. And now let's look at the sixth consciousness. The sixth consciousness. The sixth consciousness is the cognitions and perceptions take place in the sixth consciousness. The six, along with the five perceptual consciousnesses, perceive worldly phenomena. The six takes manifestations of the five aggregates, the five masses of Dharma. Five masses of Dharma as object, means the external object, and generates various non-continuous concept of self. This process also includes its interactions with the 51 dharmas interactive with the mind. So all the things that the five perceptual consciousness interact with, perceive in, will get into the sixth consciousness, the sixth consciousness. And here it will start to manifest the five aggregates, the function. Try to differentiate what this thing is about. A sound, an object, a smell. At this point, just this. So the sixth consciousness distinguish between good and evil and make moral determination about the input of the five perceptual consciousness. So they will, at this point of time, the sixth consciousness will distinguish, oh, this is red color, this is blue color. This person hit this person bad. This person take care of the old people good. This distinguished the object or the actions. It also uses the dharmas of the basic and subsidiary afflictions along with the three natures and the three modes of knowledge which pervade the three states. This I'm not going to explain because this is supposed to be three different topics. And in these processes of six consciousness creates karma by its examination and decisions, which then leads to the physical actions. In here, the six consciousness, when they start to lead to physical activities, it has to work together with the seven consciousness and retrieve out the information from the eight consciousness. So in the eighth ground, the six attachments to the perceivable divisions of the eight consciousness is a burden, so there is no longer attachments to self, only Dharma. In here means that the six consciousness, when retrieving out the information from the eight consciousness, and then in the seven consciousness, they make a decision on whether to attach or let go. And because of this decision there, this six consciousness will follow the decision and have the physical actions. So in Yogacara, they split into very detailed which consciousness function in what way. But actually they function most of the time, they function at the same time. It's so fast. It's so fast that you can't even aware of it. And how will you be able to aware of this? Meditation. Through meditation, you will slow down your mind. When slowing down your mind, you will start to analyze the functions between the five consciousnesses, the six consciousness, the seven consciousness, and the eight consciousness. Okay, we continue the seven consciousness. The seven consciousness. The seven consciousness obscures a person's true nature with the ego concept of I. It is also known as the defiling transmittal consciousness because it is the home of illusory ego individuality, with which it defiles the first six consciousnesses by obscuring them with the concept of self. The seven consciousness also defiles the eight consciousness by attributing to it characteristic of a real self that exists in space and time. What does this mean here? The seven consciousness basically is the ego consciousness. The ego consciousness whereby it determined that I hate this, I like this. I hate this or I like this. So the I become very big. The I become very big. So when the external factors interact or perceived by the first five consciousness and then enter into the sixth consciousness, the sixth consciousness determine that it's a bad or good. That's it. Bad or good, red or white. But these informations will go into the seven consciousness. And this seven consciousness will go into the eight consciousness and start to dig out the memory. And if the memory have a lot of I don't like, then the seven consciousness will say that I don't like it. And the seven consciousness will tell the six consciousness is that I don't like it. So the six consciousness will, oh, okay, in that case, I don't like it. The body will start to have this function, says that I ignore, I don't want to see the red color. And again, I have to emphasize here is that this is not a direct from 6, 7, 8. It comes, it go in and then it comes out and it go in again. They function, most of the time function together very fast, extremely fast. And I have to say that a lot of time we have no idea that how it comes out with these physical reactions from our body or from our mind. We have no idea how they function, how they determine what is good, what is bad, what I like, what I don't like, what I hate. The seventh mode of knowledge is misconception caused by its inherent attachment. This inherent attachment store in the eighth consciousness. But this seventh mode of knowledge is misconception in the what? In the eighth consciousness. And because of these misconceptions, it leads us to rebirth again and again and again. Since the seventh consciousness bases its decisions on relative diffuse knowledge from the Dharma of judgment, it is built on false assumptions, which give it 4 types of delusion: pride of self, self-love, self-delusion, and self-conceit. So everything is about self. So 7 consciousness is the consciousness in our mind that holds so tight about I. So abide to this concept of I. Very sticky I. And it also supports the 8 major great affliction. The major great affliction: laziness, distraction, lack of faith, and etc. So 7 consciousness basically is a quite a subjective consciousness. Subjective. And this subjective consciousness ties with the ego of I. When we ties with the ego of I, me, look here, look at me, then things become what? Difficult. Because when we can't get what we want, definitely we will suffer. Definitely. So this is the 7 consciousness. Now we enter into the 8 consciousness, which is the so-called the storage consciousness, the mind only. So in Yogacara theory, everything is mind only. And this consciousness is divided into 8 sections. The principal part of consciousness is the alaya, or the storehouse consciousness, which is the basis of the 7 other consciousness. A lot of memory stored in here, or we call it the karmic seed. All 8 compress the mind dharma and the 50 dharmas that interact with the mind. So you can look for the 50 dharma in Google or in the Buddhist dictionary. The alaya consciousness is also known as the source of impressions. From the alaya arise all of our ideas of self, ego, and their respective functions in the external world. So this storage consciousness, not only the idea of ourself, this body, this ego, but it also includes the function of the external world. So if the alaya is imagined as a vast ocean, then the 7 other consciousness are waves on the surface. The 7 are not separate from the 8 nor do they disturb the stillness of its depth. All eight are essentially one. So during the Buddha's time, the Buddhas only talk about the six consciousness. The first six. The Buddha did not mention about the second consciousness and the eighth consciousness. It was the Abhidharma that start to try to analyze it. Try to analyze it and separate it out. That tell us the function in our mind. And later on, Yogacara start to elaborate in a more simple way. The Abhidharma explained it in a very complicated way, and the Yogacara try to explain it in a easy way. But it's still not that easy. It's still not that easy. So the number 1 to number 8 consciousness, they actually are one entity. The only thing is that when they function together and make the decisions or the judgment at the same time, more or less at the same time. But Yogacara tried to explain that it actually works in different moments. The 8th consciousness is beyond the dualism of object and beyond the dualism of subject and object, or assistant and non-assistant. So it does not have any purposive activities and is unaware of subjects. Since it does not make distinction and is neither good or bad, the 8th consciousness is said to have the state of equanimity. The 8th consciousness basically just function like a storeroom. The storeroom will not differentiate what thing is good, what thing is bad. And also in this storeroom, there are a lot of things. A lot of things in it. And sometimes it's even very messy. So when a person, the mind or the consciousness get extremely messy, then their mind basically are not functioning that well. We continue. The alaya consciousness is the karmic storehouse. The karmic means memory, and also called like a seed, very tiny seeds in the storehouse, which contains seeds generated by our unenlightened actions, which are our actions. Although it does not create karma, the alaya functions as the subject of retributions for past intentional activities. The process of ripening of seeds, thinking, and perceptions of object is all subject, and neither the process nor its results have any real existence. Because of the karmic activities of the 7 consciousnesses, the alaya continue developing karma seed, which in their fruition influence future attachment and activities via the 3 dharmas and the 9 ground. So what it means here means that all our physical activities from this body and our mind activities in this mind, all of them will be stored in this alaya consciousness. And this actions becomes memory. And memory are like seeds, tiny seeds spreading around in the storehouse. So final freedom from the samsaric process occurs when all the defiled seeds are replaced by pure seeds created by pure deeds. This is very important. It's not we take out the defilement seeds. It's that we cultivate, create more pure seeds to cover, to override, to replace the defiled seeds. The alaya also contains intrinsically pure seeds, which are the source of our motivations towards enlightenment. Upon enlightenment, the eight consciousness become empty of repenting seeds and is transformed into the great mirror wisdom. So in our eight consciousness, we have the seeds of Buddha nature. We have the seeds of Buddha nature. And if we continue to cultivate, the seeds of the Buddha nature were ripened. And when it ripened, it will transform to become the great mirror of wisdom. So this is how it works. How it works. But again, it's not so straightforward. It's stepping forward and then stepping backward, forward and backward, forward and backward. For those people not aware of what they are thinking, they will act as according to their karmic seeds, which means that according to their karma. So they will cultivate, they will create and cultivate more this karma into their eight consciousness. If they are greedy, they will cultivate more greedy. If they are lazy, they will cultivate more laziness. Here, the eight consciousness. The alaya has two divisions. The perceiving, the subject, and the perceive, the object. The former is linked to the seven consciousness. Get from the seventh consciousness. While the later is linked to the sixth consciousness and the five perceptual consciousness. So alaya consciousness have two divisions. One is the informations from the sixth consciousness that comes from the five perceptual consciousness. The other informations comes from the seventh consciousness together at the same time. And sixth consciousness pass these informations to the seven consciousness at the same time to the eight consciousness. And the seven consciousness will retrieve out the information from the eight consciousness and then start to shout out that I don't like this. So when the perceived divisions is transformed during enlightenment, it becomes subsequently attained wisdom. This attained wisdom means that we are able to manage our mind. The sixth consciousness and the second consciousness, and make a decision on how do we react to this external objects, factors. So this baby saw all this thing. Hear, taste, see, smell, and touch this thing. Interact with it. The information will go to the five prajna, means the five and the six consciousness. Six consciousness means mona consciousness. So the eye, ear, nose, tongues, and body consciousness receive the information that interact from the baby with the things outside. And then this, at the same time, the sixth consciousness, the mona's consciousness, will start to say that, oh, this is a pink flower. A pink flower. And from the mona consciousness, the sixth consciousness, this information will pass through the mana consciousness and also the alaya consciousness. So we pass to this. At the same time, the manas consciousness immediately go to the alaya consciousness to retrieve out. So alaya consciousness will very fast retrieve out the information to the manas. And manas in here, due to its ego karmic habit, will start to have the reactions to the eyes consciousness and also the the five consciousness and also the six consciousness says that I like it. So the outwards turning informations to the baby. I like it will go to the actions from the baby. I like it, I will smile. I don't like it, I will cry. I hate it, I will get angry. I don't care about it. I will have this expression from out my face. So this is just a very brief explanation about how the consciousness interacting with each other in a very short and fast time. Very short and fast. So here, again, a very brief introductions on the process of consciousness. Enlightenment is not achieved through only conceptual understanding. It's not something that is conceptual type of understanding. Since everything prior to wisdom is consciousness, enlightenment requires an internal transformation of consciousness. It needs to be internal transformed. Yeah, it needs to be internal transformed by knowing very clearly about the functions of all the eight consciousness. Initially, if we can begin to distinguish that there is a difference between the constructs of relative, conditioned mind and the pure, absolute, enlightened mind, then we can leave the formal and stay in the later. For two, ascents to the wisdom of enlightenment require negating some sammic reality while aspiring to the nirvamic dual. It's a make of the choice. When you get more and more alert and you understand, you make the choice of your life. So the process of transformation of consciousness is in threefold. So in here, I just give a simple this diagram here that the cognitive and the emotion, information go in, information comes out, and then comes out again, and then the body will start to have reaction. So the seeds of the past actions automatically ripens into the form of mental phenomena, which we believe to be the external events. That is the retributions processes that occur in the eight consciousness. The ongoing sprouting of the karmic seeds gives us belief in the reality of our senses, of our body and the external world, which we know via a process of five mental operations. So number one, the connections between the external objects and the sense organ. The second, the mind focus on the object. The third, our experience on the object. The fourth, recognizing and categorizing the object. And fifth, make a judgment about the object. So the process of the five mental operations. Again, in a very simple way to draw it out to all of you. The connections between the external objects with the body sense. The mind focus on that object. This is a rate. Our experience of the object, due to the experience, the memory is rate. Recognizing and categorizing the object. Okay, there's a red, beautiful color, shining red. And then after that, make a judgment about the object. I like red color. I don't like. It's supposed to be blue color. The seventh consciousness, which deals with cognitions and mentations, believe in a self represented by the eighth consciousness. Since the eighth contain all the six, the seventh take it as its object. That's mine. As an object that belongs to me, because in the seventh consciousness, this self is very important. The six other consciousnesses are responsible for perceptions via the five mode of perceptions and their mental adaptation. So the first six consciousness basically are very quite simple. The information enter in, the mind focus on this object and define the color, or say that this is the color, and then say that this is the color goes to 7 and 8 consciousness. The 8 consciousness job just to retrieve out. It's just like a USB. They just retrieve out information. They don't determine whether this is a good thing or bad thing with virus or not. It's the 7th consciousness that attach to say that I like this thing. These files in the USB are very important or not important. So it's the 7th consciousness that the self-ego that make us make a unwise decision. So I already give a very, very, very brief sharing of the teachings in Yogacara on the mind consciousness. Very, very brief. Because in order to know about the Yogacara, we really need a year to do study on it. So for these 10 classes, we cover the religion and culture in India before Buddha's time, their relationship between Buddha and the local tradition and culture, and what are this tradition and culture impact on the Buddha's teaching and thinking and daily activities. And then after that, we talk about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha during the Buddha's time. And also the teachings from the Buddha. The Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, Three Dharma Sales, and Dependent Origination. And then after that, we discuss on the Zekism of the Sangha order. Start to have different school established. Split out into the Mahasanghika and Stavrirvada. 2 different schools, and from these 2 different schools, start to establish more school. More school. So later on, people say that the Mahasanghika belongs to the great vehicle. The Stavrirvada belongs to the small vehicle. But this small vehicle, this term Hinayana is not respect to those elder monastic. Not respect, because a lot of elder monastic, they serve in the community as well. And then after that, we talk about the transmissions of the Buddhisms to different parts of India, the flourish of the Abhidharma. Monastics start to do a lot of research, analyzing the teachings from the Buddha. And they start to stay in a place to do their research and study. And many of them did not really come out to serve the community. And from the Abhidharma, they try to analyze it, right, like writing a PhD dissertation, get more and more complicated. Initially, the establishments of Abhidharma is supposed to be what? Explain the teachings in the sutra in a way whereby be able to understand by more people. But ends up is that it gets so complicated, Abhidharma become a text or a school that difficult to learn and understand. very difficult to learn and understand. And then after that, we talk about the Dhyamaka school and Yogacara school, the school of emptiness and the school of mind only. And you might say that, okay, so there are so many schools, Buddhist schools in India. How come Madhyamaka school and Yogacara school are the most famous one? Because at that time, it depends on who win the debate. Who win the debate? If the person win the debate and many people start to follow this person to study what he understand from the Buddha's teaching, then this school will become very famous. And that's what happened to Madhyamaka school and Yogacara school. Because during that time in Madhyamaka school, Nagarjuna, during that time, Buddhism, Abhidhamma get very complicated, and a lot of teachings in the Abhidhamma looks not that appropriate. And when people start to debate, they attack each other. So Nagarjuna stepped out and says that we need to go back to find out what is the teachings from the Buddha, the ultimate teachings from the Buddha. That's the reason. And why the mind-only school established. During the Nagarjuna's time, they already talks about the emptiness already. Why do they still need to, Sangha and Vasubandhu needs to come up with this idea of mind only? The reason is because human beings good in creating things. It's supposed to be simple, but ends up those people that practice the emptiness shift to nihilism. Shift to nihilism. And that's the reason why there were Abhidhamma writings that refute the Madhyamika. And Asanga and Vasubandhu, when they study about the emptiness and realize that this is not correct, it's not supposed to be something said by the Nagarjuna. So they want to what? Get back. Want to get back the original teachings. Original teachings. And so that's why the first turning of the Dharma was during the Buddha's time. The second turning of the Dharma was during the Madhyamaka's time. And the third turning of the Dharma wheel was the Yogačara's time. Trying to go back to the original teachings from the Buddha. Unfortunately, due to the time, the conditions, the people during different time, the conditions are different. And that's the reason why Buddhism in India, due to various reasons, disappeared from India. Of course, war is one of the reasons, invaded by Muslim. But the war in the India area, from different countries in India land, they're still having war with each other. And also they have war from Greek. So war is one of the reasons. The other reason is because Buddhist monastic, they stay in the monastery and do research and write dissertation. They get lesser and lesser visiting the people in the city. And Hinduism get popular in the city is because they stepped out and interact with the people. So when the people need counseling, need funeral service, need blessing, they will look for the Hindu priests. And monastic just stay in there under the roof to do research. So Buddhism get more and more unpopular in the Indian different village or different city. So monastic are supposed to reach out, but Also, at the same time, monastics supposed to cultivate themselves as well. So we are in the 10 classes, we already cover all this topic. I try my best to provide the information as simple as possible, so that at least you have some brief idea about the history of Indian Buddhism, and most important, the two schools in Indian Buddhism. This is something that as persons that study or not want to practice Buddhism, you have to have some background knowledge on what happened during the ancient India of the Buddhism. Okay, so this will be the end of the class. If you have any questions, I think we still have one Q&A session. You can ask during that time, or you can email to me during that time. I will put the PPT into our classroom and hope that it will help you. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time. 阿弥陀佛。